Your 1882 Foundation. Um, and they're really celebrating the accomplishments of our wonderful summer internship cohort, which Ellen has done a great job of leading this year. So they've been with us for the past couple of months, about 10 weeks. And in addition to doing a lot of great work helping us do programs and events, they've been working on their own research capstone projects, which she'll be sharing today. So each of them will share their presentations, and then at the end we'll have time for some Q&A. If you'd like any snacks, water, or anything, please feel free to help yourself. And the restroom is back if you go out towards the hall in the back if you need it. But yeah, without further ado, we're going to ask Emma to start. She is currently in China right now, right? So she's a bit of a interesting time zone. So we appreciate you for coming out. And yeah, 6 a.m. very early to talk about your project. So I'll let you take it away, Emma.
Hi everyone. First of all, sending my apologies that I can't be in office in person. My grandmother has been having some health issues, so I had to fly back. But I'm really grateful to have spent the summer with 1882, and I guess I'll be back in the office when I come back as well. But I'm really grateful that I got to spend the summer with my co-interns and also with Ellen and Mia and so many of the other amazing people in the office. So a lot of this project was like it took a whole village. A lot of the ideation and also like the actual execution, I wouldn't have been able to go through with it if I didn't have like the support of people in the office and also of their ideas. So I'm gonna share screen. This usually takes like um, when I go into slideshow mode, I usually have to jump out, but let me. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I can get started. My project is I looked at the Chinese community church yearbooks and I worked with them over the summer to kind of find ways to better display them. So this presentation will mainly be an introduction of my project, what the goals were. I'll talk about the process of putting things together and then show you my final product and then kind of talk about what I hope to do in the future. So, as for this project, I wanted at first to do something related to digitizing because I realized that I had access to a scanner this summer because I was staying on campus and I had used it for other projects related to like on-campus work, and I thought it'd be cool to use the scanner to digitize some things that haven't really been before. So I think in the office, Ellen and Mia helped me pull these Chinatown yearbooks from the Chinese community church next door, and they're from like the oldest that we have is the 35th anniversary yearbook. So they made yearbooks every 5 years. And the 35th anniversary yearbook is from 1970, I want to say. So a couple of decades ago. And I looked through them and I thought it was very interesting that not only did they record religious life of Chinese Americans, but they also had like advertisements of businesses and they also had, greetings sent by different individuals, some prominent, others community leaders. And so there was a lot of additional aspects to the yearbook aside from, just about their faith. And so I thought it'd be fun to kind of take a look at all the different advertisements and messages that were sent throughout the decades. So my main project goals was that I wanted to kind of find a way to preserve some of the community memory because I believe the 1882 Foundation has done projects in the past related to the Chinese community church. I think Mia did projects related to them, but I kind of wanted to take like a closer look into each individual feature of the yearbook, so go page by page, and to document some of the things that I found. I also really liked the idea of creating some sort of publicly accessible archive that could be clicked on by different individuals, and then they could like peruse the site and look at different things that I would, help curate and pull. And then also just for my own personal learning and growth, I thought it'd be really fun to, through this project, learn more about like niche DC Chinatown history facts, because I could look very like a very microscopic level of looking at specific individuals, specific businesses, and then find ways to like create a narrative and tell a story about everything, and do some community-based research. So my intended audience for this project is, I was kind of thinking about myself first and foremost, like as a student, because I think there's a lot of materials online about, LA, San Francisco, Chinatown, New York, Chinatown, and, the history and all of that. But really the 1882 Foundation, throughout like my time in college, has been really the only resource that if I wanted to, look at something or write about something and research about DC Chinatown, that was kind of the only site available. And the resources that the 1882 Foundation has put together is already very helpful. So I thought, I would want to contribute to kind of that effort of making DC Chinatown history more visible, and also creating more of a like a scholarly resource so that people in the future, students, and just anyone who's like curious can find ways to learn more about DC Chinatown. So this is my process of putting together the archive. I really had two steps. One was scanning, which was by far the most tedious process, because I had to, like, using the big scanners, you can only do one page at a time. And based on the image quality, and I figured out that I had to do a higher image quality because of how small the font on some of the pages were. So that took extra time of just waiting and then flipping to the next page and scanning again. But it helped because that was kind of the only way I would get clear scans that I could use. And I, had to rescan at times, but that was kind of how the project came together, because without those scans, I couldn't have put anything up. So that kind of moves into the second part, which is the display. And I use this website called Story Maps. And what Story Maps does is that it helps you build your own website. But the main reason why people use Story Maps is that it also has other features like mapping or GIS. And I was interested in mapping and GIS because most of the, you know, history is based in DC Chinatown. So I thought I could use mapping as a way to visually display some of the things. Um, and maps are always very fun, and it's fun to click on. So Story Maps already has like preset filters and themes, so it allowed me to get started very quickly. So these are some of the Story Maps features that I was talking about. One would be mapping, so spatial organization. I was really interested in that. And then you can also add text, of course. And then you can also add documents or images. And so people can click in and expand and be able to view things more clearly on the website. And they have different ways of helping you arrange images and like galleries. So I, of course, took some inspiration from sites that I've seen in the past using story maps. So this is one of them that was done by the University of Maryland and some students and researchers there. And this was an oral history mapping project where they asked residents, I believe mainly in the Wallach House, like what makes Chinatown Chinatown, and they asked them to draw maps. And I came across this, I want to say like a couple months ago, and I just thought the way that they arranged the site was very cool. I can kind of show you other, like it's a scroll down feature, and there's, mapping involved, and there's a lot of text as well. And so I really liked what they did there. And then the other site that I took inspiration to was from one of my classmates. Her name's Ellie, and she also did a yearbook project where she looked at Georgetown University's yearbooks and then looked at Asian students and Asian student life. So she did a really great job with, and certainly, you know, helped me figure out ways that I could pull from yearbooks by looking at images and text and what I could kind of analyze from something as something as kind of simple but also meaningful as like a yearbook. And then also the 1882 Foundation has like mapping projects in the past. I looked at Dear Chinatown, DC, where it was I kind of use this as inspiration for how to like separate the different, businesses or restaurants compared to more like community services and finding ways to express like what still exists and like what no longer exists as like a organization. So this is what the like base of the archive. It's just a Google Drive, but I uploaded all the scans and then I started to organize them mainly by four folders. One would be, which is the biggest category, restaurants. And then I looked at people and then organizations and then also some miscellaneous like other categories of other businesses that, there weren't enough to create a separate folder category like restaurants. And so these are some of the scans that I did. So in order to get like the image quality, I had to kind of work with the scanner and figure out how like the settings of it. So that was also something. But I ended up with these scans that I'm pretty happy about where I can, see the text clearly in some of the images. And then as for how I like tagged and organized these scans of different like this is what a page of the yearbook would look like where there would be a newspaper clipping or some text about the church itself, but there would also be paid advertisements of like this is a music company. There's also family associations and organizations. There's restaurants. This happens to be in Florida, so not really relevant. There's like an insurance company. There's another music company, and then this is a DC restaurant, the Yenching Palace, that's unfortunately no longer open, but like this is kind of how I looked at each page separately and then tried to pick out what I thought would be, interesting to look at more closely. And then this is the story maps process of, so this is kind of the base site, and then these are some of the features. So you can add text, buttons, you can even code, you can do maps, charts, infographics, and then also images. So I was mostly interested in using the mapping features and then text paired with images. So this is my final product. The original plan was to do a lot of things, which was to not only scan, but also write a lot about the yearbook pages. So I had anticipated that I would, be able to add more descriptions for each item, but it just ended up taking too long to digitize everything. So I didn't really have that much time to, write about each item and do a report about the process and give a toolkit, but that's all a future plan. So this is the main page, which is a just a navigational page. And then the other page is featured advertisements. I'm gonna jump out of the presentation to kind of show you more clearly the website, um, if that's all right. All right. Um, so sorry. So this is the main page. Right now, I just have an introduction to the project, a table of contents, and then other resources. I found these resources that talked about the Chinese Community Church more in detail, and that I also hope to plan to use to do more writing about the church itself, as I'm missing like a key introduction to what the church actually is. But if you click here, there's a takes you to the 35th anniversary page, which is the 35th anniversary yearbook. And so the featured advertisements that I kind of pulled included businesses, people, and networks, so kind of the same folders. So this first part is restaurants, and I found a collection of restaurants in the DC area and really the DMV area, so also Maryland and Virginia. And starting from Virginia, you can kind of scroll through and look at the different restaurants and their advertisements as well as their locations. So as you can see, there's only like a handful that are really in the DC Chinatown area. The rest are kind of sprawled out, and we even go up to Baltimore here. But going back to like just Chinatown, if you zoom in, there are certainly, a handful. I don't think any of these restaurants are still here, but there were definitely some. And so that's kind of the main, like the bulk of what this website currently is, which is just featuring different restaurants. And um, the next section is prominent figures. So I thought it was very interesting that different individuals would send greetings to the Chinese Community Church, kind of thanking them for their service and congratulating them for being open for however long. So for the 35th anniversary yearbook, we have this ambassador from the Republic of China, so Chao Shu Kuai, and he wrote like a I guess a statement about the church and its importance. And then you also have, I thought this would be so fun to show Elaine, but this is one of the first like Chinese and Asian American senators from Hawaii, um, Senator Fong, and he also congratulated the church. And then there's not a picture of this person, but the chairman of the Overseas Chinese Affairs Commission of the Republic of China also sent like a Chinese greeting. So those are some of the prominent figures that I found. There's also different organizations, so family associations, um, Christian national conferences, and Council of Community Churches. And then this is the really interesting part that I hope to take a deeper dive in, but there's a lot of photos of like events that the Chinese Community Church hosted over the past year. There's some newspaper clippings um, of, the Washington Post writing about the church. And then, yeah, so there's a lot of archives that can be, I don't know, if I could find a link to the Washington Post's newspaper archive with the full article, I think it'd be really cool to attach. And then there's also some writing about like community life. Um, so, they had a couples club, they did lecture series, and they wrote about the church's attendance. So 154 people, pretty impressive. They at this point were still pretty big. And then they also had Chinese school, which I think we still have, or I still went to Chinese school. So that's, thinking about how they organize their life around the church. So that's kind of the website so far. Um, I'll go back into the slideshow. Okay. So the last part is the challenges that I faced and also future directions for the project. So right now there's a lot of other yearbooks. This is the current catalog. So you have the 35th, and then you go all the way down to 80th, which is from 2015. So there's a lot to look at over the years. Right now I have the 40th anniversary all scanned. I still need to finish sorting them, but that is in the works. And then once I finish sorting everything, I can do the same thing I did for the 35th anniversary. And I'm also thinking of ways of, if there's still a lot of restaurants that are open from the 35th anniversary, finding a way to tag and label them, of new I guess, interesting things that came up over the past 5 years since the past anniversary yearbook. But yeah, so far I'm just scanning and finishing labeling everything. As for challenges that I faced, I think the main thing was just be how like tedious the scanning was. I had to book the digitization room at the library, and I could only book it in blocks of 3 hours. So that meant I really only had like 2 hours to scan things, and then I had to spend like an hour uploading everything to the drive. So since I had only 3 hours a day, that meant I had to kind of work a bit more slowly than I had hoped. Um, and then also it was really annoying because somebody like stole or lost the key for like a whole week. So I was locked out. I couldn't use the room for like a whole week. So that was like, an unexpected roadblock. And then the quality of scans was like another issue of just at first I wasn't getting the scans that I wanted because they wouldn't show like the text. It was all very blurry. So I had to learn how to use the settings. So that also took some trial and error. And then I just think the number of pages, while I was doing pretty much 2 pages at a time with the scanning, the yearbook is a lot like larger than I had expected. They had so many pages. Um, so that was just another like feeling overwhelmed about if I could get through and finish the project. And then I guess another challenge, but not really a challenge, was that I didn't know much about, these restaurants or church life, like what the Chinese Community Church as an organization was before, like prior to starting the project. Um, I had really only learned about the church since coming to the 1882 Foundation, so I kind of had to learn as I went with, what the church does, like who are the leaders of the church's history, and all of that to be able to kind of figure out how I could like organize and write about um, the history of it. So future directions and like things that I'm excited to continue doing. As I mentioned before, continue uploading scans and creating a page for the 40th anniversary. I also want to experiment with arranging miscellaneous businesses, and I'll show you what those are. Also, writing a lot more informational text so that when people look at different things that I've uploaded, they know what they're looking at. And then researching restaurant history, and then something that I think Ellen and Ted brought up, which I thought would be really fun, is doing interviews, oral history, or just talking and kind of showing this to the residents of the Wallach House to see if they have any memories, photos, or any additional information about some of the various things that can be found in the yearbooks. And personally a really big fan of oral history, so I'd be really excited to see if we could do that. Um, but as for the miscellaneous businesses that I found, there's this like travel advertisement from Japan Airlines. There's like these Chinatown markets selling like mass producing goods that restaurants could use. There's funeral homes, which I thought was really interesting because they are a very important kind of tie between, China and the US, and helping families arrange this. Um, the House of Ung did like I think they created their own ramen of some sort or their own food, and I thought that was very interesting that they were advertising um like their kind of made to go food. And then there's also this like construction company that was specifically targeting Chinese restaurants with helping them do design equipment and all of that, and they even listed some of the like restaurants that they've done in the past. So I thought that that kind of showed the significance of these Chinatown or Chinese restaurant businesses because, the advertisers are marketing specifically to them. Um, so I thought that was very cool. And then there's this one, which I believe is like some sort of film distribution company, but I don't know. I think it was like promoting. I would have to look more into what TWA is, but I just thought that it was cool that they were advertising films from Taipei to Hong Kong, and trying to bring more film to the US from these places. And then some other things that I looked at that I think I took inspiration from Ellen from, which is kind of looking at like what restaurants still exist. So we have Samji Wong's Illustrious Moon Palace on Wisconsin Avenue. And like looking at the Moon Palace restaurant, you can find like pictures of it, but also there's like this Facebook page called Historic Restaurants of DC that wrote a feature about the Moon Palace restaurant. So I thought that was, something that I could look at more closely, which is what is the individual restaurant history, because some of these places seem to be pretty significant if they're getting written about as well. There's also restaurants that are still open, so I didn't think most of them would be open, but if you look, Ding Hao Restaurant in Springfield still has like a fully functioning page where you can order things. They have like an in-person location still at the same address. So, they've been around for decades now, like 55 years. I- so that's, I think, something very exciting, which I don't know if I could contact these places and ask them for more information about themselves, but maybe. That's really all I have. But thank you all for listening and for all the help that I received for this project. And I'm very excited to continue with it.
Emma, thank you for all your hard work this summer, and we're excited to see everything else that you do, slash the continuation of the project. So we are gonna transition over to Kristi's presentation.
I have little handouts. Do you want me to
Pass them around.
kind of from up into it?
Don't mind, give you one.
Hi, I'm Kristi. My capstone project is a film discussion zine specifically on the farewell. I really love film and media. I think they can provide a glimpse into sort of identities and experiences different from your own. I think I learn a lot about different kinds of people by watching films. And I also think life imitates art and art imitates life. So I try to, take take the message of the film and really apply it to my life. But growing up, I felt that there wasn't enough accurate representation for Asian Americans in media. So much so I did a contemporary history project in 10th grade that really catapulted my interest into API studies. With that project, I basically just surveyed my friends and was like, hey, who is an Asian American actor that you know? And I think it was like 60% of people said Jackie Chan. And then I was like, actually, he's not American. So this is not working out for anyone. But one of my favorite movies is The Farewell, because after watching it, I felt like that was the first time that I felt represented. If you don't know about The Farewell, it came out in 2019. I have a little summary in there if you want to read it. But it's basically about Billy, who follows Billy as she navigates the terminal diagnosis of her grandmother, Nana. And then her family has like a bunch of these events leading up to a fake wedding so that family members can come and see the grandma for maybe the last time. But yeah, I grew up living with my grandparents. I still do live with my grandparents. And like living in a multi-generational home
I felt like I could see a lot of similar themes and conflicts being played out in that film. But yeah, if you look in that zine, I have a brief summary of the film, the cast and crew, and then I have questions, discussion questions, sorted by like different themes that I saw. So the first page is like Black and Grief, really trying to put the audience into the shoes of Billy, seeing if they would do the same thing. Would they still keep the secret from your grandmother? Or would you speak out and say this is wrong, or what have you? There's also questions about like differences in upbringing, especially with like different views on showing emotion between Billy and her mom. I think this is like a very like generational, it's so interesting to me because you and your parent can grow up in such different environments and have such different views on life just based off of where you went to school and who you went to school with, and things like that. So really trying to get people to reflect on that, and with their own families. The next I have cultural practices. With these, I really wanted to try to connect the reader's culture with the ones shown in Farewell if they have a different one. For example, there's a scene where Billy's family gives offerings to the dead. And I think that's really similar to many cultures. Filipinos do it. I know in Mexican culture, it's really big for Dia de los Muertos. So really trying to connect the dots for there. And then the next page is on diasporic differences. The film talks a lot about like American individualism versus collectivism, which is seen in a lot in like a lot of different Asian countries as well, where you are essentially being seen as part of a whole. And if you were to go to a different event, you are essentially like representing your family, and making sure you're upholding your family reputation. And then the last one, the last question page is just about the overall story, whether or not you agree with the ending of the farewell. It kind of leaves it out in the open. There isn't a really a big conclusion at the end. And then also just comparing this film to other representation of Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Indian American communities in other movies or books or media. And then the last page is basically activity to try and initiate that like internal reflection. And it's a letter to your grandparents, whether or not, you know, addressing any misunderstandings that you feel that you have, or any communicative barriers, yes. But yeah, that is essentially, some of them are a little wonky. I'm still working on like the line work, so, but all the content is the same and good, I swear. But yeah, the purpose of this project is to basically encourage and also inform conversations about, you know, Asian American identity and connect it to the experiences of others. With this, I really want to promote accessibility and convenience, and then also assist teachers in conducting these conversations in their classrooms. Conversations about like history, culture, identity. I was really inspired by 1882's zine making event. I just love little cute things, and I feel like this is so accessible. You just print it out and fold it up, and you're good to go. I think also this is good if you are going to like a film screening, just pop it in your bag and then take it out afterwards and talk with your friends on the way home. And I think also as a student, I hated getting packets. So I hopefully this alleviates that as well. But yeah, these zines will be a great additional resource for 1882's Lit Corner Library. And I talked with Lauren about it, like being featured on the website, and then also potential future film screenings. Hopefully, I feel like this would be really great to have in public libraries or local theaters that do screenings for specific films, and not just on the farewell, on like different films, any place that will screen these films. And then especially for API month or any like Asian American film festivals, these zines could be made and then distributed according to the film. But yeah, that's my project.
Really fantastic project. All of the projects are fantastic. I'm not gonna, yeah, but so, thank you, Kristi, again, for all your hard work. And now you all have a fun little thing to take home with you.
Okay.
Did it cost money?
No, it was, I only put it 20.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, good, okay. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to Sravya's presentation. So, Sravya, take the stage / mic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ellen, and thank you, Mia, as well, and everybody who's been so supportive during my time here in DC. I'm excited to really present my capstone project for the summer, which is called Plating Identity, the Evolution of South Asian American Cuisine in DC by me. But before I jump into that a bit, I just want to talk a little bit about the inspiration behind my project. So I'm not originally from DC. I actually came here all the way from Texas, and back home in Texas, I've been really involved in a lot of really wonderful Asian American work. And so when I landed here, I just had no idea what the Asian American cultural scene was like. I had no idea of the Asian American community, Asian American history. And so when I joined 1882, I was really curious to learn more about, the specific local histories in the nation's capital. I had a chance to, learn more about DC's Chinatown through a Chinatown tour that we did back in June. I also learned of things like the Manila House, which was a gathering place for Filipino Americans here in DC in the early 1900s. But I didn't find too much information about South Asian American sites. The only one I could really find that has been documented or recorded was the Fazl Mosque, which was founded by the Ahmadiyya South Asian American Muslim community, I believe in the 1950s. And so I think that really inspired me to want to dig more into South Asian American sites here in the nation's capital, especially with me being a part of the South Asian American community. One of the things that I ended up learning is that the largest Asian American ethnic group here in DC is actually South Asian American. And I think one of the most visible ways that you were able to see that is through the food or the culinary scene here. So I've just been seeing a lot of restaurants. And so that really piqued my interest to want to delve a bit deeper and really understand the stories and the histories behind some of these restaurants and their owners. And lastly, and this is a bit more personal, but one of the other reasons like I was particularly drawn to focusing on restaurants is because I think in my personal life, they have played like a huge role in helping me find a sense of community, belonging, comfort, and nostalgia through the food and the culture. I've done a lot of work in Asian American spaces, and sometimes I find that I'm the only person of South Asian descent. And even then, within my own Indian American community, sometimes I find that I'm the only person of my specific cultural heritage, as well, being specifically of South Indian descent, because a lot of, I would say, Indian American spaces still generally tend to be very North Indian centered, which is a very different type of culture. And so as somebody who didn't really grow up speaking too much of their heritage language, didn't always have access to like material culture or, other people of a similar background, restaurants were in particular one of the very few places I felt like I could go to and feel that sense of belonging and familiarity that I sometimes didn't always have in even in Asian American or Indian American spaces. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. So that really informed kind of the overarching question that I wanted to ask as part of my project, which is how it has cultural and culinary representation evolved in South Asian or South Asian American restaurants in Washington, D.C. since 1965. I say 1965 here because the very first South Asian American restaurant in DC was founded that year. It's called the Taj Mahal. And then specifically when I use the terms cultural and culinary representation in the capstone of my context of my capstone project, I refer to how restaurants have constructed and expressed cultural identity, heritage, and values through their food, ambiance, and other sort of elements. And then I also focus on South Asian Americans, specifically as a larger group, as opposed to something more specific like Indian Americans, just because even when I do feel like there is research on South Asian American owned like businesses or South Asian American owned restaurants, it often is very like Indian American dominant or centered. And I did also want to take an opportunity to highlight smaller ethnic groups that might, you know, whose histories or whose narratives might be like masked by just like a very Indian American centric narrative. And so specifically in DC, the two kind of other Asian American or South Asian American ethnic groups who have like businesses here are also like Pakistani Americans and Nepali Americans, in addition to Indian American. So really those are the main three kind of like ethnic groups I've aimed to focus on. And specifically, I was hoping to pursue this question through a combination of oral history, content analyses, and archival research, which I can delve into that process a little bit further into my presentation. So moving on to project goals, I definitely, first off, wanted to preserve the historical and culinary, contributions of South Asian American restaurants here in DC. I think that was the primary goal of this project, if that's hasn't been made apparent. I also wanted to take a moment to also just center South Asian Americans in the restaurant industry and their stories. And then I also wanted to have this inform and educate, but also really lay the groundwork for future scholarship, programming, or exhibitions that expand South Asian American representation in public facing cultural institutions. I definitely wanted this to be, accessible, so not filled with like incredibly difficult to understand academic jargon. So something that anybody from any sort of background could read and understand, something that was easily digestible and comprehensible. And I definitely wanted to spotlight everyday places as, very powerful institutions for storytelling, memory, and community visibility. And so I think for 1882 in particular, especially as kind of like a public history organization, so working kind of outside of the academic context, my project would be very useful, especially with maybe more recent attempts to broaden or expand its scope to doing more Pan-Asian American work. And so with these goals in mind and with my overarching question, for my end product, I was debating between doing a digital exhibit and archive or penning a series of magazine-styled articles, just describing my research process and, the findings that I had, or insights that I had come to learn. And while I think both of these were really great options to bring public history to the public, I personally did not have access to some software that I believe would make for good digital exhibit or archive. I did not have institutional access as a non-student. And so it seemed a bit more reasonable for me to go with the magazine style article route, which is why I ended up choosing that. And I think through kind of a non-academic publication, as I mentioned before, it would be more accessible and easily digestible and comprehensible for people to understand when viewing it. And so the first stage of my process, of my project, was to conduct a content analysis. So specifically looking at menus, specifically visiting restaurants and taking photos and understanding the ambiance or the environment that they try to create. And so that was one of the first steps that I did in being able to understand how South Asian American restaurants in DC have tried to cultivate or culturally express identities through its various elements. Another thing I also employed was using archival research. So I specifically visited the DC Public Library thanks to, with the help of, Mia's DC Public Library card to search through kind of old newspapers or old photos of South Asian American restaurants that I could find. I also made a very concerted and intentional effort to contact restaurant owners for potential oral history interviews beforehand. So these are restaurants that are still in business, just because it takes a while to be able to schedule any sort of interview with them. I ended up being able to complete around 3 oral history interviews, which in the time given here in DC, I think is a pretty reasonable goal to achieve. And then I also did some preliminary research on Asian American like food culture, on like Asian American family owned like restaurant businesses or the food scene, just through what scholars and journalists have already written about the subject to see if that might be able to guide my own research on South Asian American restaurants in DC. And so then the second part involved me, drafting up oral history questions. Specifically, I chose to use a semi-structured oral history interview because I definitely had certain information. There was had certain goals about what kind of information I wanted to really like get out of my conversations with my interviewees. But I also wanted to ensure that the questions allowed for space for storytelling, reflection, and to not rigidly follow a script. And also if there were certain responses that my interviewees provided that led naturally to new directions, I would also have the flexibility to pursue that line of further exploration if I had wanted to. And then I conducted interviews. So I met up with 3 South Asian American restaurant owners, Dinesh from Indigo, Rahul from Rasa. Both of those businesses, Indigo and Rasa, are Indian American, and then Qazi Menon from Lazizi Halal, which is a Pakistani American restaurant. So I either met them at their business in person or I met them online. It was a lot of work to schedule interviews with them. That was definitely one of the largest challenges I faced. Sometimes I would email them, we'd schedule a time and they wouldn't show up. Sometimes I would, have to follow up with them multiple times to see when it is that our schedules will allow for both of us to meet with each other and speak about their own thoughts and reflections and learn more about their journey being in the restaurant industry as a South Asian American restaurant owner. So there were definitely like challenges, but I would say overall within the given time frame, I'm pretty satisfied with the amount of like interviews that I was able to accomplish and the kinds of conversations I was able to have with them. And then finally, and I think this is one of the really fun parts about this project was being able to eat the food. Just because I have been missing Indian food so much, any sort of South Asian food. So definitely there is an element of nostalgia to this project. So as you can see on the slide, that is one of many lunches that I would have. And then the third step after kind of doing my research and finding materials, conducting interviews would be to code for relevant themes that I saw across like all these different materials and all these different sources that I come across. And so I tended to look through transcripts of interviews or, read excerpts of news articles to just kind of come to certain common themes. And so, for example, some of the themes that I came across was the exoticization of South Asian food or culture here, particularly in the United States, including in DC, an association of foreignness or even disgust with South Asian American food, culture, people. The redefining and reinventing of cultural legacies by different generations of South Asian Americans and different waves of South Asian American immigrants, and then aspirations to elevate South Asian American cuisine in the eyes of mainstream American culture, and then using or restaurants acting as these public institutions and engaging in philanthropic as well as community building work among the South Asian American community and bringing awareness to specific South Asian American cultures. And then the last stage was actually writing or drafting the articles. So that is just like an image up there, as you can see, of one of the articles that I wrote. And then also just some images of photos that I was able to, collect from the archives. And as I was writing the article and as I was collecting these photos, I definitely had to navigate and really ask myself what role I had in interpreting versus kind of amplifying community members' voices and words, as is. And so having to make a decision about that. And I ultimately came to the decision that I would use quotes, and I definitely spotlight, their own words, but I'd also tie in my own analyses based on my preliminary research I did with secondary sources and my own knowledge of Asian American studies to also kind of contextualize their experience. So kind of having that balance between presenting their narrative as is, but also adding my own interpretation to really giving that a very like comprehensive, maybe understanding, hopefully, of South Asian American cuisine and how it's evolved in DC. And again, because this is a more non-academic piece, I also had to be like considerate of not using too much academic jargon just to make it more easily comprehensible for members of the public who may come from all ages, all backgrounds, to be able to engage with my project. Whenever I've done historical research, it's usually been in a college or university context. And so I think I've just been naturally trained to use very like academic language. So I think being very careful to just make sure that everybody can understand. And then also kind of going into comprehensibility and digestibility considering the ratio of like archival sources, items, oral histories integrated within the article with actual text to ensure that like readers are not like too lost and that there are multiple ways in which people can understand and receive the information that I hope to communicate. And so this slide just has a couple of links to the articles. The first article really just talks about my own inspiration for the process. I'm not gonna like read the entire thing. I've pretty much talked about a lot of this already within my presentation. But then the second article, you open it up, talks a lot about the evolution of South Asian American cuisine in DC from 1965 to 2000. 1965 being, again, the first, the year where the very first South Asian American restaurant was founded. And so I talk a lot about just how some of the very first restaurants had to navigate you know, Americans or, you know, the average American not really understanding what South Asian American cuisine is, and then going into, you know, how they also try to appeal to certain notions of Indianness or South Asianness. And especially when it comes to cuisines or cultures from these smaller South Asian American groups like Pakistani Americans or Nepali Americans, a lot of people did not know even what Pakistani or Nepali was, but they had some idea of what Indian was. So to market themselves, they would advertise their restaurants as Indo-Pakistani or Indo-Nepali, even if they are Nepali or Pakistani owned, and they'd offer a lot of more familiar South Asian American dishes. And then really starting from the 1980s up until kind of the 2000s, there was these attempts to elevate South Asian cuisine in the eyes of, you know, average Americans, average DC residents. And so a lot of these restaurants really relied on people like the presidents or famous politicians who came and visited their restaurant to bring more awareness to that culture, to South Asian American food, etc. And then the last article is a little bit more contemporary in nature, focuses on the evolution of South Asian American, you know, cuisine and culture in these restaurants, starting from the early 2000s to the present. And it talks about the development of more regionally specific offerings at South Asian American restaurants, and that correlation, or right, and that being because of new and different types of immigrants, even within particular ethnic communities, migrating or increasing in larger and larger numbers in DC and even just the general DMV area. And also how a lot of second generation South Asian American business owners are really creating and cultivating their own legacies, or reinterpreting sort of the legacies that their parents or immigrant owned South Asian American restaurants have set, and also a lot of like fusion food as well. So combining aspects of Indian or American heritage or South Asian and American heritage, and culture and ingredients to reflect that, that unique identity. And so these three articles, it's all pretty much the text is done. I'm just trying to find a way to be able to integrate that sources that I've been able to come across, specifically the photos and the newspaper excerpts, as well as some of the oral history interviews that I've done, to ensure that the messages and the information that I am, you know, that I'm trying to communicate can be communicated effectively in multiple ways. And then I'm also working on putting some citations and footnotes there as well. So those are some future steps. And if you go back to the presentation, I've gained like various insights from pursuing this project. One, I've actually had the pleasure and the opportunity of being able to connect with South Asian American restaurant owners, even though I myself have not grown up, you know, as a child of, you know, South Asian American immigrant restaurant owners, even though I don't have particular personal or familial ties to the South Asian American restaurant scene. I definitely was able to see and experience and notice a lot of parallels between some of the experiences that the South Asian Americans were discussing, and even my own experiences and observations as well. Another insight that I derived from this project was that I learned kind of about all these different diverse South Asian American restaurant narratives in DC. And I realized, or came to the realization, that there's not really one universal narrative or experience for South Asian American restaurant owner, South Asian American restaurant. There's certainly shared or common experiences or parallels, but I think at the end of the day, to a certain extent, each of these establishments' stories and narratives stand and deserve to be spoken for themselves. And then the other thing that I was able to discuss was talking about, you know, in terms of my skills, I was able to learn and a bit more about conducting oral histories, and gathering archival materials and researching for them. A lot of my experience prior doing that has been mainly through, you know, institutions that already have those materials available. So I'm not necessarily going out to collect oral histories, right? Or I've only done oral histories with people that I am very close with or very familiar with, such as family members. And so I definitely think this was an interesting process to have to like cold email a bunch of people and learn how to kind of establish some rapport in them being able to want to participate in my project. Another insight that I gained from this project was really keeping in mind, again, writing for public or general audiences as opposed to more academic ones, and ensuring that the insights that I've gained from this project, but the information that I pen can be accessible to all people of all different kinds of abilities and backgrounds. And then something else I think was really important for this project, especially because my time in DC is relatively limited, is being able to take some self-direction and initiative in executing my research project independently, and some of the timelines and goals that I set for myself in regards to this project for the past 10 weeks. And so those are definitely some skills and some insights that I was able to really develop. And so for future directions for my project, when I was pursuing this project, I honestly came out with more questions than answers. I definitely saw not only what was being said, but also really paying attention to what was unsaid. And I think there's so many different avenues to be able to continue researching about the history and the evolution of South Asian American restaurants here in DC. So I'm hoping that I would be able to research or gather more sources like newspapers or archives, or even conducting more content analyses, even just in an online format, even past my time here in DC. I think any sort of new information is a valuable addition in trying to create something that's hopefully more more comprehensive of and reflective of the South Asian American culinary scene here, and also being able to conduct more oral histories, whether that be kind of like on a call or over Zoom, or especially since I'll probably be away from and out of town. The other thing I'm really hoping to think of is being able to archive and organize some of the materials and oral histories that I've conducted, so that if there are researchers or students or just anyone really curious about exploring these materials for themselves, they would have a place to be able to look at that, and adding things like metadata and just an organized system would definitely make that a lot more easier and navigable. And so I'm hoping to be able to do this. As of now, again, I don't have institutional access, but if 1882 happens to have like other interns that might be like interested in assisting with this as a like side project, like, and they haven't access to specific platforms like Omeka or ArcGIS or whatnot, because they're in school, like I would definitely be open to them assisting with that when possible and if interested. And I guess the other thing that I would like to also kind of extend or expand on past this project is creating an educational activity or a lesson plan based on the materials that I would hope to create in an archive or exhibit. I definitely want people, yes, to learn about the history of DC, of South Asian American restaurants in DC, but I also want them to be able to make connections to their own communities where they live. So I think if we're able to establish that personal connection, for people to really get involved and engage and reflect on their own identities, even if it's not, or, you know, the different kinds of communities that exist where they live, right? Even if it's not necessarily South Asian American, I think it's a really important way of ensuring that people are actively learning and actively understanding these experiences beyond just a smaller geographic region. And so that is it for my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, so we have had our three 1882 interns go, and Ella has had the unique position of splitting half of her time with 1882 and the other half with Alan Spears and doing his work. I don't remember the official name here.
National Parks Conservation Association.
There you go. And so this is the capstone project that Ella has worked on mainly with Alan, but she has, you know, traveled to the same events that 1882 has done, and I hope has learned a great deal here as well. We're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you to 1882. So yeah, I did Asian representation in the national parks, its future and its importance, as I did work for the leading advocate for the National Parks Service. So yeah, just a table of contents, what I'm going through as a quick introduction, the stats that I did, which was part of the project, the current situation for the National Park Service, as well as what the future might hold. So half of this project, next slide, please.
Oh,
Sorry. So half of this project was like, I wanted to do a statistical survey of the Asian representation in the national parks, which would be all of the monuments that the parks have, all of the memorials, and then actually the physical parks themselves. So the process was like me going on the NPS website, going through each of them, putting everything into a spreadsheet, and then after that spreadsheet, putting it into the statistical software and coding it, going through it. So that was fun. But this project kind of, that idea specifically originated from a little assignment that Alan had me do, going around DC, looking at the monuments, the statues, the memorials, and seeing if there were any women or any Asian people. And spoiler alert, there's no Asian people and there's very little women. So I think it's important to have more representation, especially in the parks. The parks are a resource for everybody and bipartisan. Everybody enjoys the parks. So I just think this could be a step forward in Asian representation, which I'll talk about a little bit more. The challenges, like I said, coding this was very hard, especially with something so subjective as like, what does this monument mean? So, you know, a lot of monuments can be attributed to multiple people, multiple races, multiple ethnicities, and trying to decipher who was going to be in, what was going to be in, what was going to be out was difficult. So, but I had a lot of fun with it, honestly. I like numbers, and it was a good chance to get my bearings back in statistical software because it's been a while. Next, please. Yay. I told you I really like numbers. So just something to like keep in mind once I show you these graphs. But so Asian people make up 7.4% of the American population, while Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders make up 0.2. So for a combined total of 7.6. And the largest Asian ethnic group in America is Chinese people, followed by Indian, Filipino, Vietnamese, and Korean, and Japanese. Like I said, I had to condition things to make sure that I was following a proper like experiment, basically. So again, I went to the parks website, and then I went to history and culture. I went, does this mention anybody besides white people? If they did, great. Now I can code it as like white and whatever and whatever and whatever. And then I, especially for like monuments and statues, I had to be like, does it actually represent a group of people, or is it just something very subjective like freedom? I only did national park sites and US Interior owned statues, and I did not include anything from the National Historic Register. That would have been a lot. So this is the racial representation of like all of the monuments and memorials in the NPS. As you can see, 89% of it is white, followed by Black/African American at 20. Asian American and Pacific Islander have been combined. I believe I had to combine the data because like the US Census separates Asian and Native Hawaiian, so I combined it here. I believe Asian came out to 10 and Pacific Islander came out to 7 for a combined total of 17.5. And then American Indian/Alaska Native at 10.6. And then this is like the ethnic breakdown of all of the Asian monuments. And it was, so unspecified is kind of like everything that's considered to be inclusive or like inclusive of all races. So like the American Veterans Disabled for Life, it's like meant to commemorate like all veterans, no matter race. So that's what unspecified means. But the majority of monuments/memorials are dedicated to Japanese people, followed by Chamorro, because there's a lot of monuments on Guam, and then Chinese, Korean, Filipino. And then there's like the actual number of these monuments. So there's only 5. There's only 2 for Chinese people. It's the China Beach Monument in San Francisco, and then the Victims of Communism Monument here in DC. So yeah. And then this is like the parks, a racial breakdown. So 65.2 are not dedicated, but just like primarily focus on white people, followed by American Indian, Alaska Native, then Black, and then Asian Pacific Islander with 6.2%. Again, an ethnic breakdown. Japanese had the highest because I want to say there's 5 Japanese internment sites. So that had the highest, and then Hawaiian and Chinese are the same. Unspecified again is similar kind of deal. Filipino, Samoan, Korean, Indian, Chamorro, Carolinian, Cambodian. Some of these numbers, they might not seem like they add up, but that's because sometimes these parks deal with like 2 of the same, but I just separated them out. And then the actual like numeric breakdown. So there's 11 dedicated sites, 6, et cetera, et cetera. it's numbers, you can read it. Oh, shoot, that's not supposed to be there. My bad. Wait, okay, it's fine. Can you go to the next one?
One after this?
Yeah, it should be. Yep, okay, great. Yeah, okay, so into the current situation. Wait, let me fix this really quick. Damn it. Alrighty, guys. So at the federal level, what the National Park Service is seeing is funding and budget for FY 2026 is that the House, oh my God, sorry. The House proposed a $176 million cut to MPS operations on top of already bad budgets in the past, which is undermining the park's mission to preserve and protect. Additionally, there's been a 24% reduction in permanent staff since the beginning of this year, as well as a hiring freeze that's been extended till October, meaning the park can't has lost a lot of staff and can't rehire them now, which means that a lot of historians and interpreters, etc., have left, and history/preservation may or may not be being left to unqualified people. And of course, we're in an interesting era of wanting to sanitize history, especially history that has to do with like minorities and hard topics. So there's Secretarial Order 3431 called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, which is basically asking the parks to take down anything that's negative about American history. Which is causing like self-censorship, as well as whitewashing, and then this fear of like losing your job because you said something that maybe somebody didn't like so much. So okay, great. Yeah, we're on track. In addition, I also looked at the status index, which is the social tracking of Asian Americans in the US by the Asian American Foundation, which is an annual survey of Americans' views on Asian Americans. It was first launched in 2021. And basically, the report said that 40% of Americans believe that Asian Americans are more loyal to their country of origin than the US. Not true. I was in China and I had McDonald's on July 4th. Thank you. 1 out of 4 Americans are concerned about Chinese Americans being a threat to national security. And then I think Kristi, you mentioned this. 42% of people cannot name a famous Asian American, and their #1 response is usually Jackie Chan if they can, not American. Another 54% of people cannot name a famous NHPI person, and if they can, the #1 answer is The Rock. Oh. Ellen, do you mind going back like 5 slides to the current?
This one?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and then 53% of Asian Americans, when asked why they felt they were not accepted or didn't belong, responded, "I don't see people like me in positions of power." 53% of Americans could not name a significant event or policy related to Asian Americans, and if they could, the #1 answer would be Japanese internment. And then 23% of Asian Americans feel they are completely accepted in America, and only 40% of Asian Americans feel they completely belong in America. Versus like, in contrast, white respondents said 58% agree and 71% agree. So yeah. What does this all mean? Well, it's an uncertain time for Asian American story, or every story at the federal level, especially with the threats that we're seeing right now. In terms of like funding and staffing, I truly believe those are like foundational to the Park Service, because without them, you can't run a park. So if you can't run a park, we're not even going to have anything to tell these stories at the national level. And then of course, there's this attack on history, which is not great, because we need to know our history and we need to know the mistakes that we've made. And then we also need to be able to expand and have more than just like what I would view as not exactly the best representation of Asian Americans today in the national parks, because I think we're more than just like Japanese internment and whatever. So yeah. But I also think that like if we could add more Asian representation into the parks, which is like the point I was trying to make with all those numbers, was that I think that since the MPS is the leading storyteller to Americans and a lot of Americans visit the parks, I think that it could definitely reverse this trend that we're seeing of people viewing Asian Americans negatively, because they'll be more educated about Asian Americans, which I think is a good thing. Yeah. I think this kind of, I'm done like with this project, I think, but it definitely has launched ideas of like a bigger experiment into like what I was talking about, basically, of like, would adding more representation in the parks equal a lower number of people saying, oh yeah, Asian Americans are more loyal to their country, or would it decrease this number of, I don't know a famous Asian American? So I think that would be like a very interesting experiment, but that would take a very long time to run. But yeah, that's all I have. My boss left, but thank thank you to Alan. Thank you to the 1882 Foundation. Thank you to the Chinese American Citizens Alliance. Ken, Raymond, I know you're watching probably. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Ella. Just want to again say thank you to this amazing cohort of interns. I've had the pleasure of being able to work with them this summer and getting to know them. And it's been a great experience, and I hope to keep in touch with you all as we move past the summer internship. And thank you to everyone for attending. We really appreciate you coming out and supporting our interns and all the work that they've done. We have some cake that we would like to share with everyone. Emma, we can give you a virtual treat you when you get back to the States. But yeah.
I want to thank Elaine for being the intern advisor this summer. It's a really last minute class, but she is also really important for the team. So thank you for spending your time this summer with all of our interns.